Hello, welcome back for our third video. I'm Joel Hunter, and today we are going to be talking about fasting, something very near and dear to my heart because it was my salvation from trying to figure out how to get a diet to actually work. I think fasting is the best place to start with dieting rather than being some advanced technique down the road. And today we're going to talk about why I think it's a good place to start rather than any of the techniques and stuff. We'll cover that in later videos. You can't stop me from talking about fasting because I like it so much. So there are a lot of different types of diets. Everything from weird stuff like the blood type diet to paleo, to keto, to carnivore, veganism, vegetarianism. There are a lot. And the thing to know about diets is that all of them work, and they all work the exact same way. They reduce the number of calories you are consuming to be lower than the number of calories you are burning for your energy. So your energy out is higher than your energy coming in. And they all work that way. They work through different methods of how to get less calories in or how to get more calories out, but they all do that same thing. Now the key there is they all work when we do them. And pretty much anybody can do a diet for a while. It takes a certain amount of willpower to do that, but most of us have that much willpower, and it's something that we can stick to. And at the beginning, it's kind of encouraging because you're losing weight. Things are going the way they're supposed to, and then it gets slower and more difficult, and then you taper off, and then you end up eating more than you did before, partially just from frustration, partially because it's been so long since you've had an ice cream sandwich that you just really, really want one. Mine was cookie dough. I don't know why. It's probably bad. I don't have salmonella that I know of, but I should. And so all of that was an ongoing problem for me, this yo-yo dieting back and forth, until I discovered fasting and specifically discovered the science behind it. Now here's why fasting works. Food consumption is a little bit like breathing in a way. Calorie consumption is like that. And what I mean by that is it is voluntary up to a point. After that, it just becomes compulsory. If you ever were a kid, most of us were, you probably did a game at some point where you would float face down in the water and see who could hold their breath the longest. Maybe I just was around really competitive children, but we did that a lot. And you can hold your breath for as long as you want until you can't. And then your body says, I've got to get some air, and then you're going to pop up and you're going to breathe. That's how calorie consumption is. Our body gets to the point where it says, I've got to increase the number of calories coming in compared to how many calories are going out. And it's not a choice. It's something that we have to do. Could you throw someone in a prison cell and not give them any food? Yes, just like you could hold someone's head underwater. Both of those things are going to kill that person. And someone who is acting of their own volition and whose body is able to do what it needs to do to survive, they're going to eat, or they're going to breathe in the case of the pool contest. Now, the thing about calorie consumption as opposed to oxygen consumption is that it's harder to see the compulsory part of it, the part of it that your body is just doing whether you want to or not. Willpower aside, you can have all the willpower in the world to hold your head underwater, but you're going to have to breathe. There's a compulsory part to eating, and it's harder to see because it happens over usually months rather than the minutes that it takes to realize that your body's going to breathe whether you want to or not. And so the reason it takes so long for it to happen is because our body is slowly realizing like, hey, there's a calorie deficit here, I'm burning more calories than I'm taking in, and our bodies are made to try to survive. And so if it senses, I've got to get more calories in, either your hunger levels, not subjective hunger levels, but objectively how hungry you are going to go through the roof, or your basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories you're burning just to keep the lights on, just to stay alive, that's going to tank. But it's usually a combination of both of those things. And those can only stay that way for so long before you have to eat or before it affects your performance just in your daily life, because it gets really hard to get out of bed in the morning because you don't have any energy and you've got such bad cravings. And it's not just because time has gone by, it's because your body is literally amping up the volume saying you've got to eat something. And that's what makes regular dieting so difficult. Now here's the thing, we have with us a ton of calories all of the time. It'd be like in the pool contest if we were able to cheat and have an oxygen tank down there with us. Everyone else would see that, so it wouldn't work as a good way to cheat with the pool contest. But with calories, we have fat storage on us all the time. The fat that's on our bodies is literally just storage for calories. That's its entire job. All of the subcutaneous fat we have, the visceral fat that packs in around our organs when we have too much subcutaneous fat under our skin, all of that is energy storage. It's calories consumed that we did not burn. And we have tons of it. We are extremely efficient at storing fat, much to our own frustration. It's part of the reason this channel exists in the first place. And you may think like, well, what about people who are really, really lean? I found this picture of, what's that guy's name? Channing Tatum, and also Jessica Alba. These are very fit people. And I went ahead and did the math on their body fat percentage and their weight. Both of them are carrying around 75,000 calories worth of fat. And that's not because they're fat at all, quite the opposite. They're specimens. But our natural ability to just hold on to fat storage and how efficient that fat can be used for fuel to burn calories is so high that even people who are really fit have tons of extra fat storage all of the time that can be used for calories. And so it's like we're carrying around this extra calorie tank, like the oxygen tank, but we can't access it. Our body is extremely good at storing calories. It makes it very, very easy to store calories as fat. And then it's very, very efficient in using those calories for energy, just in general when we eat stuff. If you wanted to walk 1,000 calories, you can walk for 13 miles. It's a half marathon, give or take, depending on how much you weigh, but right around 13 miles just on 1,000 calories. That's a lot of distance to cover for just 1,000 calories. If you want to eat 1,000 calories, 3 or 4 slices of pizza. One of those is clearly much easier to do, it's the pizza one, than the other, which is walking for a half a marathon. By that point, your feet really hurt. Our body really, really is good at storing that stuff and really efficient at using it. Now, what's keeping us from being able to use the fat we have in that energy calorie storage tank? There's a lot of different answers, but the primary answer here is one specific hormone called insulin. There are tons of other hormones involved in this, neuropeptides and leptin and ghrelin, but primarily the linchpin of all of these things is insulin. Insulin is the hormone that our body uses to store things. It stores fat, it puts sugar into our muscle cells and the rest of our cells so that our body can use them. Insulin's our body's way of saying there's food around, we have enough, we're going to store things up. When your insulin is low, your body says there is not food around, we don't have calories, now we need to burn our natural first glycogen storage, which is just sugar storage in our body, and then fat storage after that. We have to have insulin low in order to access that fat efficiently. The problem is we have so much food around all of the time because we get to have breakfast, and then there's bagels in the break room, and then there's M&Ms on the reception desk, and then there's a snack that we keep in our drawer that we don't tell people about. We just have it in case we need it. There's constant calories coming in, and so insulin is always up, and it's up, and it's up, and it's up, and it stays there. And so our body does what our body's really good at, and that is it adapts. It gets used to having that much insulin around, and now that insulin that was higher than normal just becomes our baseline. And then we stay there for a while, but we keep on eating, and so our insulin now is a little higher than that, and that becomes our baseline. And that's what's called insulin resistance. Our body becomes resistant to the normal amount of insulin that would store fat, and it just keeps high amounts of insulin all the time, which means it keeps our body in a constant fat storage state even when we're not eating. And the reason that that's so destructive is because when we're trying to store away all of our calories all the time, it's keeping us from accessing the fat calories that we're storing on our body. That means that we're hungry all the time, and it's because we're eating some sugar, and then we burn that off, and then our blood sugar drops, and then our blood sugar goes back up because we find some M&Ms to eat to rise it up again, because insulin's always around and always keeping our fat safely locked away so that we don't access it. It's kind of like trying to keep a fire burning with just paper. Sugar would be like paper in this case. Burns off really, really fast, doesn't do much for a long-lasting fire. Fat in this case would be like logs of wood. Takes a little bit to access it, to get it going, but it keeps the fire going for a long time. It keeps your energy levels up for a long time. The problem is we can't access it because our insulin is always high because of the foods that we're eating. There are a lot of different ways to decrease insulin. Primarily, decreasing sugar in your diet is one way to do that. But all foods raise insulin a little bit. Protein less than sugar and general carbohydrates, and fat the least of all. But all of them will raise it a little bit. There's one way to have insulin be the absolute lowest that it possibly can, and that is having no food at all. Now, you can't do that for a long time, and at the beginning you can't even really do it for that short of a time because you're so used to having food around that insulin is kind of high and makes you really, really, really hungry. But when you learn to fast for longer periods of time, sometimes it just starts off with deciding I'm not going to eat between dinner and breakfast and then lengthening it out from there. What's happening is you're letting your insulin levels drop to normal physiologic levels where they should be so that your body can start accessing fat the way that it should, the way that it was built to do before we had our insulin high all of the time over the last century. That's what's happened. Now, this takes a little bit of planning. It's hard to do when you just jump in and say, I'm not going to eat anything for 24 hours. Sometimes that can leave you so hungry that you end up eating a lot of cookie dough. But there are ways to make it easier to ease your toe into the water and to stay there and to let those fasts last longer and longer so that you can access more and more of your own fat stores and burn that stuff off for energy, because that's what it's there for in the first place. The nice thing about fasting is as you do it, rather than other types of diets which get more and more and more difficult because you're hungrier and hungrier and your energy levels are lower and lower, with fasting, it's the opposite. The more you do it and the longer that you do it for over time, this is over weeks and months, it gets easier and easier and easier. When I first started fasting, I remember the first time I did it, I was trying to go for 16 hours without eating. At hour 14, I was so hungry. I did push through to 16, but barely. I barely made it. I was starving. And then after about 6 months of getting used to doing it and doing it for longer and longer periods of time, super easy to go 24 hours, 48 hours without eating. It wasn't something that was just constantly occupying my thoughts. And that's because I didn't have super high hunger levels all the time because my body wasn't saying, we need food, we need food. It had food because it had the fat on my body that it could access. And it could access that because insulin was low. So that's why we start with fasting. Next time we're going to go over a little bit about how to start with fasting. And I hope to see you at that video. I won't, it'll just be this camera lens, but in a way.